All right, so let's talk about agile. So agile, as we mentioned last week, it's a methodology that allows us to deal with requirements and project management and at a much more efficient way than waterfall. Right? You know, if a product is a very mature product that has been around for quite a while and is very well understood in a very well understood domain, and if your organization is not in a very competitive market, maybe it's part of the government, perhaps, you know, things move a little slower in the government, then perhaps waterfall might work in environments such as that. But if you're typically in a very competitive industry where you have lots and lots of folks just competing with new features and trying to steal clients away from you, you have to quickly respond and be able to adapt very quickly and change efficiently. So agile has proven to be much more apt for these types of very competitive industries where you have to very quickly be able to adapt. So as we've talked about earlier, very rigorous processes such as waterfall don't work very well. Introduces a lot of inefficiencies that might focus more on making sure that there's full documentation, that we try to know everything in advance, things that might go out of date by the time we actually are going to implement them. Right? That it makes no sense to document something fully that by the time you actually get to implement it, things might have changed already. So all the overhead that you spent trying to document this down to the T was wasted. Right? And also because agile introduces the fact that it keeps the end user tightly coupled as part of the process, where at the end of a sprint, so there was a demo part where the stakeholders are giving a demo of where the product is currently, and they can get a feedback immediately, so that if you were trying to go from A to B, right, and as you're trying your way and implementing, you might stray away from what the end result might be, right? And so during those feedbacks, it'll give you a chance to correct, make changes, small incremental changes, so that you actually end up with B. Right? Or B might start changing, right, and shifting around, and it might cause the team to have to shift their direction a little bit. So agile processes are more apt for that kind of development environment. So whereas traditional sequential waterfall processes might first have a very distinct planning phase. Once it's complete, is analyze, design, code, and test. So what agile tries to do is to squish all those four together. Right? Those are definitely distinct activities, but instead, have them really iteratively, where you repeatedly do this in small chunks and get lots and lots of feedback from the end user. Does that mean that agile doesn't document at all? Well, no, we do document. Certainly, if we're required by law, or we're required by some organization or institution to provide some kind of document, we certainly would do that. But we don't just document per documentation per se, right? There's no value in just documenting, right? Only to the extent that it improves communication, we would document something. Only insofar that maybe verbally we might not understand each other, but we might jump to a board and draw something up to communicate better. Right, but not because documentation has any value on its own. Yes. Benefits allows the requirements to be discovered once the implementation starts. It allows folks that are down with their hands dirty into the code, realize that perhaps we missed something, right? That there should have been a requirement, or even folks to challenge the requirements at different levels of abstraction. Right, down from the code up to a functional requirement, up to the user requirements, up to even a business requirement, right? And challenge them and keep everybody in place. Also allows us to deal with risks more efficiently. If we see something that we're not quite sure, we're not going to be able to do, it allows for these kinds of research tasks that allow somebody to go spend a day or so learning how to do a couple of things so that we might feel more confident and lower our risk at this coming back to bite us a little later. Definitely the customers feel better since they see the progress. They feel engaged. They feel that they don't have to wait for long periods of time before they see any positive progress towards the goal. They see tangible results as they go through the process. Now, agile is not applicable always. There are certain things that agile needs as part. It typically works best if the teams are small. At most 8, maybe 10 folks working in a team. Here we have even smaller teams. We have just 3 per team. Right? Here we're not talking the team as an organization, where an organization might have multiple teams, right? Each one applying agile methodologies, where each team might be as most 8 or 10 folks. Okay, that typically they're co-located, so it doesn't work very well with remote folks. It's agile works well on folks communicating, being perhaps on the same table or coding next to each other, looking over each other's shoulder and quickly creating a pull request that you commit right away and I can merge instantly, and we all work together better if you're co-located. It doesn't work well in distributed teams, unfortunately, or if it's on larger teams and again, because it is based a lot on the communication of the team, right? So Scrum is one of many different versions of agile, right? That has some peculiarities. There's quite a few types of methods that borrow from the idea of agile, but Scrum is by far the most common one that is used in industry today. Scrum has some peculiarities. For instance, they time box their work. They say, okay, we're going to run we're going to break it up into sprints that are time boxed into 15 to 30-day sprints, maybe 2 weeks to 4 weeks. I think 3 weeks is too long. I think 1 week is too short. I think 2 weeks is kind of the sweet spot. But each team is free to choose their length. Right? The shorter the sprint, the more overhead there is at reviewing the sprint, having to plan again that sprint, and doing the administrative portion of it becomes more heavy. Right? There's a larger portion of the administrative part of this when the sprints are short. If you have longer sprints, the portion of the administrative part is smaller compared to how much time you have to actually build something. A shorter sprint, you feel like you just started, and now they're asking you right away, what did you do? I says, wait a minute, I didn't have time to even design this. Scrum is a rugby term, when folks are just huddling and deciding what it is they're going to be doing. And usually there's somebody who's responsible for facilitating the communication, facilitating the communication amongst folks. Right? So it's called the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is responsible at every week looking at the backlog of work, looking at maintaining the board that it's that all the tickets and all the tasks are in the correct status. They're not responsible for somebody else's work, but they're responsible to say, hey, is this still in progress or did you finish it? Right? And if they say, oh yeah, I did finish it. Well, could you please move it along? Put it in the right place. It's like the slave master and asking everybody else to get it together. But the team is not working for the Scrum Master, right? The Scrum Master is not the leader, right? He's the one who facilitates the meeting, okay? And so we're asking you in this in our course to run the scrums, to choose a different Scrum Master every week. If you think it's every week is not enough, if you prefer to have the Scrum Master be for 2 weeks all the time, I'll leave it up to you, right? If you prefer to have Scrum Master be for 2 weeks, 2 sprints as opposed to just 1. Also, at the end of a Scrum, typically there is a retrospective meeting that happens where the Scrum Master asks everybody, hey, what do you think worked well in that sprint, right? What do you think we should keep doing or what do you think didn't work very well this sprint, right? And the Scrum Master should be will be the owner of these tasks, right? Or would keep track of these tasks, and they say, and maybe perhaps assign it to someone to say, well, if something's not working, right? Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do better next time, right? And maybe assign it to somebody in the team to make it happen, right? Make somebody the owner of improving something. Perhaps folks might say, well, this sprint, I really couldn't get it started until the designs were done, right? And I was kind of blocked waiting for somebody to come up with the UI here. I couldn't get going, right? My task was to communicate with some third-party API, but the API key, I didn't have the keys. When I had them, I didn't have the authentication or whatever, right? And so all those things are meant to be part of the retrospective and see what can we do next time, right? So we review the backlogs. Backlogs are all the work that is still in our to-do that we haven't yet even started, right? The backlog is a collection of all the things that everybody wants us to do, right? But we haven't decided what to start working on, right? And perhaps typically what happens is that the Scrum Master, the project manager, the business analyst, and the product owner, they meet, and every week they go over, they comb through the backlog, right? And they might say, depending on different priorities that they might have heard from above, from the executive folks, they might say, ooh, these 3 or 4 stories, they're very important now, right? Let's bring them up, right, in the list of things to do. There might be a couple things that were vague, but now we do understand them. Maybe we update some of those stories and add some details in there. We might have a better understanding on the sizes of things, and we might go over these stories and update their sizes, right? And then depending on those depending on the priorities and also any dependencies, technical dependencies, the project manager and and others in the leadership team might decide what to do that sprint. Now, a lot depending on how technically savvy these folks are, they might be able to identify that certain tasks are depending on each other. It says, no, you can't start doing this until you do this other thing, right? You can't start creating the services until you have a database, right? You can't start doing, you can't start implementing the web pages until the designs are done. Yes. So part of that technical savvy might also inform which things occur in what order, right? And hopefully the leadership team has the technical savvy and architectural knowledge to decide and identify these dependencies of what should be done in what order. Right? You don't want to put 2 folks working at the same time in the same sprint where they depend on one another. Although we did this in our sprint, we did it on purpose. Where one is waiting on the other, right? I can't start my work until you do your work, right? You're kind of blocked. So one of the key practices in Scrum and Agile in general is collaboration, right? Where we're going to instead of having to write everything down and do lots of diagrams and whatnot, we value more collaboration. Let's talk about it. Let's just discuss it, right? As opposed to writing it down and writing some pretty diagram. We would if some folks are working remote, right? We have maybe a remote team working in Eastern Europe or somewhere else. Then we become much more dependent on documentation, right? Because they might be in a different time zone. There might be lots of back and forth asking on how things should be, right? So we might be more dependent on actually having very, very specific documentation of what is it that you want me to do, right? So there's less collaboration, there's less opportunity of sitting down and just saying, what is it that we're doing, right? And just hashing it out and talking about it. So collaboration is very, very important. Typically work in open areas where we foster collaboration, where we see folks that next to each other says, hey, I know how to, says, oh, I'm having trouble here, and says, oh, I know how to do that, and they jump and help each other, right? And working in the same branch, or I'm having this bug, can you help me? And that's fine. Working in a collaborative environment. Frequent testing, it's also part of the the agile is to make sure that if we reach a particular level of quality, to make sure that we have a test that verifies that we don't have a regression on something that used to work no longer works, right? So we create a test to make sure that that stays working, right? We also in these types of collaborative environments, we make use of continuous integration, is emphasized heavily, where we can commit code to a branch, automate all the builds, the tests, the deployments, the packaging, and making it available, all in a very automated sense. We'll do continuous integration a little later, I think, when we come back from the break. Right, so we kind of in this loop of applying all the different phases of the software development cycle, but repeat it over multiple sprints that can be between 15 and 30 days. Key practice: we time box, especially in the sprints, 15 to 30 days. We time box also, research stories or design stories. We say this shouldn't take you more than a day or 2 days to do this, right? And if it takes more, then just stop, right? As far as you got it, that's as far as you had. Also, we depending on the points that we put on the stories and how much we're adding onto the sprints, we are able to see what is the work capacity of the team, and say, okay, we're able to, as a team, we're able to address 15 points per story per sprint, and kind of that's our capacity, right? Now, whether that productivity can increase or not, if we had faster machines, or we had if we had a continuous integration, or we had some QA folks join the team and whatnot, and that capacity can increase, well, that's also something that should be considered. Requirement stories are tasks that we identify that the team needs to work on, where we write in a very high level what is a particular feature or a particular set of goals that a particular user would like to be able to accomplish. Such as a some role, right? I want to be able to some feature, right? And so in order to, so that I can, and then some goal, some generic goal. Right? So this is a template on being able to that will allow you to write user stories that capture a feature from the point of view of a particular person. Right? In our case, it would be maybe as a system administrator, I want to be able to delete a user, right? Or I would like to create a user, or update a user, or change somebody's password, right? So that so that person can then reset their password and log in and have access to their account. Now these stories are deliberately written with no detail, or very little detail, right? At the beginning of the sprint planning, right? It's then left to the individual developer, right, to whenever that particular story is selected for implementation, to start asking questions. It says, okay, how is it we're building this? Right? It looks like we're going to need a table for that. We'll need a button for that. We'll need a form for this. We'll need a couple things for there. We'll need a drop down for that. And once they start hashing out, maybe create a small little prototype, right? We can start talking about actual implementation. But they're deliberately left at a very vague, very high level, even though, especially so that since these stories may never be implemented, right? It might be that they're never selected. They never had a high level priority that somebody actually decided to build this. Right? So why to bother, coming up with any of these details if this might never be built? Okay, we might write tons and tons of stories that are never actually implemented. Right? But they're in the backlog, just like we just want to make sure that things are not we don't forget something. So I know we need to do this. Maybe it's not as high a priority as something else, but it's there. So user stories. We're going to write lots of user stories. Now user stories can be written usually at the beginning when this whole idea of agile and scrum and whatnot, when it first became popular. Folks would capture user stories as post-it notes, right? Or as 3x5 cards, where they would write in the front. They would write something very high level, and the back maybe a couple bullets that of some detail, right? And they would have a board, a physical board, on the perhaps in a wall or on a room that was specific to that team, usually referred to as like the war room, where they would have multiple columns, and they would have these sticky notes that in various statuses, whether in the to-do, whether you're working on it, whether they're done, and then different types of stories would have different colors, right? You would have maybe a user story might be blue, a design story might be yellow, a bug might be red, right? So you would have different tasks that you'd be working on, right? User stories typically would be representing a new feature, something that we're actually building, right? Whereas an enhancement might be something that already exists, but we need to maybe tweak it here and there. Or a research story is something that, hey, I don't know how to use Java Persistence API. Let me go and research it, right? Let me build a little, vertical prototype and learn about this. I've never used React. I've never used this, that, or the other. Let me create a little research story and go figure this out. So there'll be multiple types of stories, different types of tasks with different colors. Now today we don't, we still use some teams still use that, but typically we use tools such as Jira and some other project management tools to deal with this. Some components of user stories, meaning new features or user stories, there'll be some description, saying so and so wants to be able to achieve this, that, and the other, right? Written in that templates that we showed you earlier, plus some conversations, typically captured as comments, right? Typically, a user story might only have the title and may only have a very vague description. But then, as a developer who's assigned this story, they will go into back and forth discussions with the product owner or the business analyst, asking, hey, what about this, that, and the other, right? And that's part of the comments that are added to the Jira stories. And we ask you to practice. We ask you for each one of the stories that you build to add a comment or two to the stories, just to practice the skill. And finally, a done criteria. Again, as part of the conversation with the business analyst, what would you like to see? Once I build it, what are the tests that you're going to do manually to verify that this is actually done? So, okay, well, I'll log in, I'll navigate to this page, I'll click here, there, and the other, and this is what I would expect. Perfect. That's exactly what you would write as the done criteria, the acceptance criteria. And that's what I'm going to do, so that you're going to come back to me and says, yes, this story is done. I can move it to the done column. A couple of story qualities. They're written from the perspective of the user. They're focused on a particular feature and the different actions that user has to perform to achieve that particular goal. And also typically has a line or two that tracks this story as fulfilling a particular business need or a particular business purpose that were captured in the business catalog. Also some user role modeling where you identify some personas. Alice, a female in this particular age bracket with these many children, picking up folks from school, or some retiree, in their 70s and whatnot. So you have certain personas that allow you to to see or write these user stories from their perspective, right? Trying to be in their shoes. Story cards, where you have actually physical cards where you will write on the front using this pattern, as a particular role. I want the functionality, and so you can achieve a particular purpose. So in this assignment, we ask you to write a couple of these, right, for these stories. You're not going to address them in this sprint. You'll address them in later sprints, okay? But we want you to practice writing a couple of these, all right? And as part of that story, you would write, some of the information that you might need. What are the steps that would make this a successful story? How much detail? Again, at the very beginning, not a lot of detail at the beginning, right? A lot of these will never be implemented, and again, we assume that at some point later we're going to come back and write the details on this because the subject matter expert is available to us, right? We should be able to ask them, right? Ask on Piazza, ask on a forum, and say, hey, how is this supposed to work, right? And we would then fill in the details of that. Some story sizing guidelines. We need to be able to story size and say, how big is this complexity-wise? And typically we choose a pointage measure on how things are complex. Epics allow us to group together multiple stories that are typically related to one another. Typically, epics are large stories. Basically, managing a user. That's a huge story, right? It's actually many stories, right? So it's an epic that allows you to add users, update users, delete users, right? So epics typically are huge stories that need to be decomposed. There are several strategies that you can decompose it using CRUD stories. That's exactly what we're doing. We'll need a story for creating a user. We'll need a story for updating a user. We'll need a story for deleting a user. Right, so that's one of the strategies. Other strategies depend on the specific types. So for instance, depending on data boundaries. So I might have some boundary with some third-party API that I need to communicate, right? And depending on that API, right, then I'll have stories that are specific on how to interact with that API. There might be an API that allows you to retrieve a large collection of objects, and maybe another API that allows you to retrieve a particular object, yes? So I'll need to have two stories at least. One that allows me to retrieve a list, and maybe one that allows me to retrieve a single element, yes? So that's another way. Operational, depending on who's going to be maintaining this later on, right? Of being able to publish new once I created the content management system, I'm going to have editors and publishers and reviewers having to maintain this or operate on the system. So this would be other ways of dividing or decomposing large stories into smaller ones. Typically, you'll have some workshops at the very beginning on coming up with lots and lots of use cases, and then later on throughout the sprints, you'll come up with additional stories from developers identifying new things that need to be built, or stakeholders as they review what has been built so far. New stories will be added. Usually, you build this at the beginning of very low fidelity. So you create maybe a low fidelity throwaway prototype like we did last week, right? Where the horizontal prototype. This week we're going to do another low fidelity prototype, but it'll be a vertical prototype. We want to know how a web service talks to a Java data layer that talks to a relational database, right? So we're going to create a small prototype that we're going to learn how that works, right? So we're not going to throw it away. We're going to keep it around and we'll use it going forward. But typically this would be very just to find out how things work. Scheduling, we'll have to wait till Friday. Thank you.